They called him a criminal before they even knew his name. One mistake, one false accusation, and an entire police force decided his life didn't matter. Jabari wasn't a threat, just a man walking home from work when flashing lights turned his world upside down. They dragged him, humiliated him, and stamped his future with a record that wasn't his. But what they didn't know was that the man they tried to destroy would one day walk back through those same doors, not in handcuffs, but with the deed to the building in his hand. How did it happen? This is Jabari's story. Before the world knew his name, Jabari Miles was just another man trying to make an honest living. 31 years old, quiet, hardworking, the kind of man who believed that if you did right by people, life would return the favor. He worked as a construction foreman in a small Georgia town, up before sunrise, home long after dark, his hands calloused from years of building homes he could never afford. But Jabari didn't complain. He believed in earning everything he had. His life was simple. Morning coffee from the same gas station, lunch from a corner diner where everyone knew his order, and evenings spent calling his mother before heading home. The town wasn't perfect, but it was predictable, and that made it feel safe, until the night it wasn't. It started with flashing lights behind his old blue pickup truck, sirens slicing through the quiet country road. Jabari thought it was routine, maybe a broken taillight. But the officer's tone wasn't routine. It was sharp, accusing, and cold. 1 minute, Jabari was explaining his drive home. The next, he was being ordered out of his vehicle, face pressed against the hood, hands cuffed. No reason given. In the background, the radio crackled with words that would replay in his head for months. Suspect matches the description. That was it. The description. No name, no crime, just a vague likeness that turned a working man into a suspect. That night, the same hands that built houses were fingerprinted like a criminal's, and while Jabari sat in a cold holding cell, staring at the concrete floor, he didn't know that this arrest, this mistake, would ignite a battle that would shake the very system that condemned him. Because once you strip a man of his dignity, you leave him with only one thing left to fight for: justice. The next 48 hours erased everything Jabari thought he knew about fairness. 1 minute, he was a working man with calloused hands and a spotless record. The next, he was case number 117423. Inside the county jail, his name meant nothing. His pleas went unheard. "You fit the description," the officer repeated as if it were gospel. No one told him what crime he supposedly committed. No one cared that he'd been at work all day, surrounded by co-workers who could vouch for him. He sat on a cold steel bench, watching as other men came and went, most of them black, most of them silent. It wasn't just the walls that made him feel trapped. It was the look in their eyes, the same quiet resignation, the same knowledge that the system didn't make mistakes. It made targets. When his mother finally posted bail, Jabari walked out into the blinding daylight with a record that didn't belong to him and a reputation that would follow him everywhere. His job was gone. Company policy, they said. The landlord asked him to move out, just to avoid trouble. And the people who used to wave when he drove by now crossed the street instead. He tried to fight it quietly at first, filed complaints, hired a lawyer he could barely afford. But the police department closed ranks fast. The arrest report claimed probable cause, citing an anonymous tip that never existed. His attorney warned him, "They'll drag this out until you can't afford to keep fighting." But Jabari wasn't built to quit. Every injustice hardened him, shaping something powerful inside, a fire that refused to die. He spent his nights studying law books in the public library, learning words like malicious prosecution and civil rights violation, and every page reminded him what happened to him wasn't a mistake. It was policy. One afternoon, while reviewing the police footage, his new pro bono lawyer discovered something chilling. The timestamp on the body cam showed the arrest happened 20 minutes before the supposed crime even occurred. The evidence was undeniable. They'd fabricated everything. The suspect had been caught miles away while Jabari was already in custody. That revelation flipped the story. Local reporters picked it up, and suddenly, the same town that turned its back began whispering his name again. But this time, with guilt, with curiosity, with disbelief. The police chief dismissed it as a clerical error. But the truth had already cracked the surface. The video spread online, Jabari's arrest, his calm voice, his confusion. The world saw what really happened. A man taken for no reason except the color of his skin. Within weeks, Jabari filed a federal lawsuit against the city, the department, and every officer involved. He didn't just want compensation. He wanted accountability. But with every move he made, new threats surfaced. Phone calls in the middle of the night, tires slashed, letters slipped under his door reading, "Drop it or else." Still, Jabari pressed on. Because once you've been publicly broken, fear loses its power. And as the trial date approached, the same officers who had dragged him from his truck now sat in court. Defendants, not heroes. What they didn't know was that Jabari wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for every man who had ever been told, "You fit the description." The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that hums beneath your skin. Every seat was filled. Reporters, townspeople, off-duty officers sitting stiff in their uniforms. And at the front, Jabari sat alone beside his attorney, hands folded, eyes steady. Months of humiliation, threats, and sleepless nights had led to this moment. The same officers who once called him criminal now avoided his gaze, their badges glinting under the courtroom lights like old ghosts of power. When the footage played on the big screen, the illusion of authority began to crumble. The timestamp didn't lie. The suspect was arrested 20 minutes after Jabari was already in custody. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The defense tried to object, to twist the narrative, but the truth was louder than any argument they could make. Jabari didn't blink. He'd lived that night 1,000 times in his mind. Every sound, every flash of red and blue, every word they used to strip him of his dignity. Now, watching it unfold for the world to see, he didn't feel anger anymore, just clarity. The police chief, a man who once shook hands with mayors and governors, fumbled through his testimony. His voice cracked when asked why the reports didn't match the video. "Administrative error," he muttered. But the crowd wasn't buying it. Even the judge's expression shifted, no longer neutral, but disgusted. Then came the moment no one expected. Jabari's attorney approached the bench, submitting a new document, property records showing that Jabari, through a community development fund he'd quietly built during the lawsuit, had just purchased the foreclosed building that used to house the local police station. The same station that booked him, fingerprinted him, and tried to destroy him. For a second, no one breathed. Then Jabari stood, looked straight at the officers who once arrested him, and said quietly, "Guess I really do own the place now." The courtroom erupted, not in chaos, but in something more powerful. Justice. Real, undeniable, and loud enough to shake the walls of that town forever. Months later, the verdict came down. The city was ordered to pay Jabari a multi-million-dollar settlement. But for him, the money wasn't the victory. It was the silence that followed. The same streets that once whispered lies about him now carried his name with respect. The police chief resigned. 2 officers were charged. And for the first time in that small Georgia town, people began questioning what justice really meant. Jabari could have left. He had every reason to. But instead, he stayed. He renovated the old police station and turned it into a community center. Free legal aid, youth mentorship, and education programs for young black men who'd been told their lives would never matter. Where there were once holding cells, there were now classrooms. And on the front wall, Beneath the city's seal, he had 5 words painted in bold black letters. Justice should never be optional. Every day, Jabari walked those same halls, not with bitterness, but with purpose. Because he'd learned that winning wasn't about revenge. It was about rewriting the story that tried to define him. News outlets called him the man who bought his own police station. But to Jabari, it was simpler than that. He was just a man who refused to stay silent, who refused to let a lie become his legacy. And yet, his story was bigger than one man. It was a reminder that for every Jabari, there are thousands who never get their day in court. Thousands whose truth dies in the shadows of procedure and policy. So the question isn't how Jabari won, it's why he ever had to fight in the first place. Because until a man doesn't have to buy justice to receive it, this fight isn't over. They called him a criminal. But in the end, he built something they never could change. Don't miss more powerful real-life stories. Hit subscribe now.